Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are listening to the Nighttime Podcast.
Hello listeners, and welcome back to my multi-part series covering the death of and justice for Sia Van Wyck. In the prior episode in this series, we met Sia's mom, Effie. During that conversation, we learned a lot about Sia's life, her family, and the effect Sia's death has had on her many loved ones. But what we didn't learn as much about was the actual circumstances surrounding what happened in the field that day. As you recall, Sia's mom, Effie, was back home in the United States when Sia was hit by a combine tractor in Nova Scotia. And as a result, Effie's understanding of what happened was secondhand. In this episode, we're going to get a much clearer but equally heartbreaking picture of the events surrounding 7-year-old Sia Van Wyck's tragic death. As you will soon hear, while Effie was back home in the United States, Sia and her dad Erik embarked on what should have been father and daughter fun in rural Nova Scotia. But clearly, and devastatingly so, that's not how it ended up. In this episode, Sia's dad, Erik Van Wyck, will join us to tell us about the special relationship he shares with Sia, their vacation to Nova Scotia, the horrific event that ended his daughter's life, and the living hell he's been going through ever since.
7-year-old Sia Van Wyck was full of life and adventure. She was playing in a neighbor's hayfield in Clementsville near Digby on July 19th when she was struck by a piece of farm machinery. Sia died hours later from her injuries.
So before we get into the talk, Erik, why don't you tell me a bit about you and your life at, present day in 2022?
Well, I'm still kind of involved in the entertainment industry a little bit. I work behind the scenes to promote the film industry here in Maine. And then I kind of supplement with other jobs. I do a lot of substitute teaching and volunteer-wise do a lot of coaching. I basically, I mean, my first priority always is just looking after my son, Nico. I split time with Effie in terms of, custody. So when I have him, I just kind of drill down on that and that sort of what I occupy my time with and focus on him as much as I can. And then on the times that I don't have him, I find that I've sort of structured my life in a way that I still spend a lot of time with his friends or other kids. I mean, as I kind of tell people, I like kids more than I like most adults, just because there's no agenda and no filter, and I'm sure it's probably therapeutic for me on some level to spend time with them, even though they drive me nuts sometimes when I'm trying to coach them or in the classroom.
Yeah, I get that 100%.
And then the times that I'm not working, I basically run and go to the gym and do as much physical activity as possible, which keeps me from going insane.
Yeah, and you just listed off a lot of stuff that you do. So you sound like a really busy guy, but on top of that, you spend a considerable amount of time and effort, and I'm sure emotion, in pursuing accountability and justice in Sia's death. Where do you find time to put energy and time towards that?
Well, it's not an act of choice, or a conscious choice, I should say. It just, as I've said to people, you lose a child, you don't suddenly stop being their parent. So whatever I can do for Sia ongoing it's just kind of organically presents itself. And in this case, there is so much to do and so much to pursue. for her and on behalf of her, not only to get justice, but to get to the absolute truth of what happened and to try and hold people accountable, including myself, So it's not really something I have to think about. It's just something that I'm always going to be motivated by. I'll just do whatever needs to be done. It's just what you do as a dad.
Yeah. Speaking of life as a dad, Effie described you as a very hands-on father. I can see that now as you're talking about enjoying spending time with kids more than adults. And I can relate to that as well. But maybe just to give me an idea, tell me about your relationship with Sia and the way you two would spend time together if it was, just you and her.
Well, we were just best buddies, Sorry.
It's okay.
It's interesting because I had so much trepidation before she was born, just about being a father, about being kind of ready in my life and settled in my career, and all the other stuff you kind of go through as a soon-to-be parent. And then she was born, and it was like a switch went off, and I just suddenly looked at her and I was like, wow, this is what I was put on earth to do, to be this little girl's father, and right from the get-go, I mean, I know it's easy to sort of dismiss me as biased, but she was just pure magic. She was everything that you could ever hope for. Like, she was just, like intelligent and smart and funny and tough and love to explore, love to just find new ways to just kind of enjoy life and look around. She just was curious about everything. She loved to be cuddled, but she also loved to be, break free and kind of do her own thing. And early on, we spent a lot of time together because Effie would work from home, and my schedule was fairly flexible, and we didn't want to put her in, daycare. It was like, why would you do that? And I think both of us were conscious early on that childhood goes by quickly. So it was like, we can make this work. So I spent a lot of my days kind of taking her to the park, taking her on different adventures, taking her to the aquarium, taking her to the zoo, taking her to the beach. This was in LA. And we just had a blast together. Like I remember talking to my friends, and they were like, well, don't you get, some of them would complain, or some of them were dads. It's like, it takes up so much time. You don't get so much sleep. And I was like, how could you possibly grumble about this? Like, what else are you going to do? What are you going to, like, go out at night with your friends? You know what I mean? Or like, it's like, why would you want to be anywhere else than with this beautiful child that you can get to know, and you can, raise and learn from, and they learn from you. And, with Sia, it was the one thing I was adamant about, was that, the one thing I knew just from growing up and being in the world is that the world can be pretty tough on women, and can be pretty tough on girls as well, in terms of like image as they grow older, and just all the things that messes with them. So it was, I had this sort of agenda of like, I wanted to raise her in a way that she felt like there were no barriers. Do you know what I'm saying? Where it was like, I can do anything that a boy can, or when she gets older, I can do anything that a man can. And that was sort of the way I always kind of structured our days, where it was just like, let her roam free, let her explore, let her, Effie did like to dress her up like a little doll at times, but there was never any of this sense like girls do this and boys do this. So she was a bit of a tomboy in that sense. I guess what I'm saying is she was such a complete sort of mix and balance of all these different things that made her sort of her own kind of view. That's why she got along with everybody. You know, she truly like would take over a room and just got along with everybody. She could talk to anybody. She was comfortable. And we just had a really, really strong bond. I felt very lucky that I got to spend so much time.
When we spoke to Effie last, I heard a lot about the trip to Nova Scotia from her point of view. Again, she was back in the United States when you and Sia were in Nova Scotia. And Effie kind of learned a lot about what was happening, either through the short phone calls with Sia from the United States, or after what happened when when Effie was coming into Nova Scotia. But I just want to ask, from your point of view, the time in Nova Scotia with Sia, could you tell me a bit about, how she was spending her time? Like, in hearing you describe her, I imagine like farms and fields would be right up her alley for, play and discovery. But maybe tell me a bit about your memories of her times in Nova Scotia, or her time in Nova Scotia.
I felt very conflicted going up there. I felt it was something that had been talked about for a couple years, that that Morgan and Doug were kept kind of presenting like, we really want to get the kids up here. They should spend the time on the farm. It's beautiful up here. And so it was hard to make it work with all of us as a family, especially when we were in California. Mm-hmm. There was a time a couple of years prior where Nico and I were just going to go, and then it was, but we were flying from LA. We had bought tickets, and then there was this snowstorm, and Morgan and Doug would not pick us up at the airport, and I was worried about renting a car, and it became a very contentious thing, and we stopped speaking for about, I'd say, a solid year after that. And that should have been, I think about that because there were so many red flags then that should have kind of alerted me and played into the decision. But then, they started getting back in the fold, and they kind of came down to visit us, and it seemed like they wanted to have a more active presence in the kids' life. But I had a lot of trepidation. I had a lot of trepidation because Effie wasn't going, and that it was just, I was excited by the prospect of a father-daughter trip because it had been a while since Sia and I had done that. At the same time, I just had anxiety about the fact that it was just going to be the two of us, and Effie wasn't there, and it's always nerve-wracking splitting up the family. Mm-hmm. Because we were very close, the four of us. Like, whatever marital problems Effie and I were having at the time, it never affected the close-knit of us as a family. We were very, very tight, very loving, cohesive. So I thought I had missed, my first memory of that trip is I thought I had missed the ferry, and I because I didn't factor in the time difference. Oh. And I remember the first feeling I felt was relief, like, oh, good, I can't go. Because Morgan had bought the tickets. So I felt this obligation. Then it was like, oh no, we could still make it. We should go. So on the drive up, she was asleep until about Bangor. And then we played different card games in the car. She quizzed me. We did play 20 questions. And I remember she had learned about a lion's mane jellyfish, and I had no idea what that was. And we were laughing so hard because I was like, what? I asked like 45 questions. And she's like, Dad, you're not even close. And I'm like, I've been through every sea animal. And she's like, a lion's mane jellyfish. And I'm like, what is that? And so we had a great, so we had a really nice drive up, and we had a nice ride on the ferry. And when we got there, it seemed like everything was okay. I started to relax a little bit, and the big ticket day was going to be the next day, which was the 19th. We went up there on the 18th, And the farm that we were going to was billed as sort of like almost like a petting zoo. So yes, Sia was very excited because she thought she was going to see all these animals, and her experience with this type of thing is like, I'm going to pet them and engage with them. You know, both my kids love animals and love being around them. So the first night was okay. She seemed excited to be there. But I could tell that she, you know, was probably putting on a little bit of a brave face, just having mom at home. Like, you know, as close as we are, it's different not having mom around. She didn't really say anything, but you know, you always know. So I wanted to make it, you know, as comfortable for her as I could. And Morgan is not, you know, the warmest of people, even though she tried in her own way, but she put Sia to bed that night, and Sia seemed okay, and she seemed comfortable. So it was like, all right, this is it. It should be an okay trip. I remember reporting to Effie like, she's okay. I'm in the room next to hers. You know, I know exactly where she is. I can see her. And then we got up the next day and we went to the farm, and you know, that's where there were issues. And when I say issues, I mean things that would later factor into how Morgan described the day to the police. We went to this farm, and it was like a farm share that, and I've since been back there. I went there a few months ago. And it was like a farm share that Morgan and Doug kind of wanted to show off, and they had cows and they had pigs and chickens, but none of them were really out. It wasn't, in other words, it wasn't set up. It was like two people that have this farm share where they have animals, but it wasn't kid friendly in any way. Mm-hmm. So Sia was constantly being told, you know, like the cows were like wild. They're the kind that had like horns on them. The pigs were enclosed in a pen. Like she was constantly being told, stay away, don't do that, go away from there. So by the end of it, she was frustrated. And I have a picture of her face, you know, like looking just sort of frustrated, kind of like, you know, what the fuck am I doing here? And that was sort of the big ticket item. And I, in retrospect, I don't think fully appreciated of how disappointing that must have been to her, because I was still, you know, constantly worried about the dynamic breaking down. We're still up there for 2 days. Morgan can be very volatile. The landscape can suddenly change, and it's like, I don't want to make the next 2 days, like one thing could set her off, you know? So, and again, all of these things, it's like, you know, now I replay it over and over in my mind. It's like, we never should have gone up there. There was no need. Like, it's clearly a trip to placate, you know, her quote unquote grandparents, who I'll never speak to again. Nico will never have any contact with. Like, it was just such an ill-advised decision on my part to even, it's like, no, you want to see your granddaughter, you come to Maine, we're not going up there. But I didn't sort of know what I knew what it was billed like, but I didn't know what the reality was. So, but I knew enough that she was disappointed. And when we got back for lunch, you know, Morgan and Doug were like already exhausted by the day. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to take Sia out and do something fun. So then we went on this trail behind the house that goes to this creek for 2 or 3 miles. We took the dog, and she had a great time doing that. We ran around, she's playing in the creek. I've got videos. And then we went to Ravenhaven, which is a local beach, about 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes away from the house. Mm-hmm. And so before we left, Morgan had said, you know, be back by 6:30, because that's when dinner will be ready. And so I'm keeping an eye on the time, you know, which again, in retrospect, I wish I hadn't, obviously, because she was having so much fun at Ravenhaven. So we went. So that afternoon, Sia and I spent together, and it was a great afternoon. We had a great afternoon, just two of us, like just so fun. She was so happy. I felt like, I'm turning this day around. This is what I need to do, is just turn this day around and make it fun for her. And that's what we did, and we went on that hike, and then we went to the beach, and we swam out to this rock, which I've gone back and swum out to a few times. And she climbed on the rock, and she just had a great time. We had so much fun. And then she met this little girl, and then I'm looking at the time, and I'm like, we got to get back for dinner. And again, starting to feel that anxiety if we get back too late, and I should have just said, fuck it, and let her play with this girl. She went and introduced this girl her age, the first kid of her age that she's met. And so we got in the car, we listened to one of her favorite songs. I would always do this thing where I'd, reach back and she'd give me a high five. We drove back to the house, Morgan and Doug's house. And when we pulled in the driveway, I saw out of the corner of my eye, I saw this tractor going around or coming up the road. And I think he had the mower with it, and he may have started circling, but I didn't really, I thought, okay, that's loud, but it's kind of a way. I didn't put two and two together. Mm-hmm. And I went in the house with Sia. Doug was outside. I saw him, and Morgan was inside. Dinner wasn't ready yet. And immediately Sia said, "Can I take the dog out?" And I had this email that I had been meaning to answer for a couple of days. My laptop was upstairs. I had a couple texts, and I just, it's a moment that I just replay over and over. I said, she's like, I think she said something like, "I want to take the dog outside." And Morgan was like, "Oh, well, okay," but kind of looked at me, and I was like, "All right, we'll stick close." And the way that house is situated, Morgan was in the kitchen, and there's a big window that opens out to the back. And I thought Sia was immediately going to that back trail, which was away from that side piece of property where the tractor was. Mm-hmm. And more importantly, I was thinking about the road. Mm-hmm. And Doug was covering the road. He was in full view of where the road was, and there was no reason for her to go there. So she runs out the door with the dog. This is all within like 30 seconds. I'm like, I'm going to go upstairs and answer this email. And I'm kind of thinking Morgan has got, an eye on her. But I don't say specifically to her, keep an eye on her. I'm just thinking she's going to go out the back with the dog. I'm not really thinking. It's just pure, one of those parental, I don't want to minimize it, just pure complacency. Mm-hmm. Just like, she's okay. She's going out the back. She's not, and again, I'm not really thinking about the tractor. I'm more thinking about the road. So then I go upstairs and I start to answer this email, and I'm probably there maybe 5 or 10 minutes. It might have been longer, but the house is peaceful. So I know that everyone is outside, and I figure Morgan's outside playing with Sia or playing with the dog, like both in my mind as I'm sitting there. Again, it's so etched in my memory because I just remembered the window that's facing the road and the breeze blowing the curtain and just the peacefulness in the room and hearing voices outside and thinking, I've had her the whole afternoon. Morgan and Doug are outside playing with her. They'll let me know when dinner's ready. Everything is covered. I'm finishing this email. Mm-hmm. And then the next thing I know, Morgan's at the doorway. She's got this look on her face. And she's like, "Erik, I have something to tell you. You need to come downstairs." And I thought that she looked so kind of, she wasn't crying. She was sort of it almost looked like she was trying to play a joke, like, "And I burned dinner." Like, I can't explain it. It was so sort of like, I need to, because she has a sense of humor, something that's like that sometimes, where she you know, it's, I can't explain it, but it's like she's like, I have something very serious to tell you, and then, you know, follows it with something ridiculous. So I thought that's what was coming. And then she said the words, "There's been an accident." And as soon as she said that, I said, "Where's Sia?" And I ran downstairs and I run out the door. There's a fucking ambulance there. And people and my daughter on a stretcher with her leg missing, moaning and bleeding, huge gash on the side of her head. Just, I just started screaming, no. And then somewhere in the back of my mind, it's like, she's still alive. Go save her. This is the reality now. You gotta fucking put your game face on and go save her. So that's what I did. I immediately rushed to the hospital and called Effie somewhere along the way, and she was still alive, and they were going to bring her to IWK in Halifax, and I was like, I'm going to learn as much information as possible and get as many opinions as possible and figure out how to keep her alive. And that's essentially what I did.
During my conversation with Effie, she talked a lot about the early response from RCMP and in her reaction to getting the news that this was deemed to just be some kind of like freak accident. Do you recall the time where you were told as dad, like, you know, we looked into it and there was, you know, this was not criminal in nature? Like, do you remember getting that news at one point?
Yeah, I mean, I remember everything very clearly. And I think my own journey with it is what helps me now feel confident that a crime was committed. Because, you know, I was very slow to respond to any of that. I blamed myself. I, you know, was like, I was the one that let her go out there. It was on my watch. I used to literally say to my kids, I'm not lying about this. I would always say to them, "What's my job?" And they would say, "To keep us safe." And I said that to them over and over and over. And so I didn't keep her safe. You know, I failed at the one job, the only job that I have in this life. You know, I failed at, and failed so completely. So I really blamed myself. And I would later learn that she was most likely struck within 4 or 5 minutes, maybe even less time, of me going upstairs, that it happened relatively quickly. And then the sequence of events to get, you know, the ambulance. And so I remember it was actually the priest when we were driving down. So there were a couple of things that kind of stood out. You know, I didn't really want to hear or need to hear, and certainly wasn't looking to scapegoat anyone. Even Morgan and Doug. You know, Effie never liked them for good reason. She was, you know, already blaming them. She had told Morgan specifically, keep an eye on her. She felt like Morgan didn't listen to that. And then it was the priest who knew Sia. When we were driving down to Sia's funeral, he said, you know, I keep thinking about, he's like, I'm not looking, and this is a gentle guy, you know, he's not a guy that goes looking for trouble. He said, I keep thinking about the farmer. It just doesn't make sense that he wouldn't see her. And so that planted a little bit of a seed, like I should follow up on this. So when I spoke to Sergeant Terry Miller, who oversaw the investigation, I asked him, I said, and by the way, nobody had interviewed me. He hadn't really interviewed me. But he told me that, essentially that it just looks like an accident. In fact, he characterized it by the phrase, just an insane phrase. He said, "Death by misadventure." That's what I would call it. That's how Sergeant Terry Miller, the RCMP, that was his. So I asked him. I said, "How well do you know this farmer?" And he said he immediately got defensive, and he said, "Why are you asking that?" And I said, "Well, is he known in the community? Are you friends with him? Do you know much about him?" And he was like, "Oh, we've had contact with him. But I'm not sure why you're asking." And I said, "Well, and this was less than a week after Sia had died." And he said, "Well, he ran over my daughter, and I just think it's important. Who is this guy? Do you know?" And he hung up on me. Like literally hung up on me. And so I remember going over to Effie right after that conversation and saying, okay, maybe there's more to this story. Mm-hmm. And Effie was already putting the feelers out, getting the police report. She was very motivated to immediately, and I will say, fully admit that there was a part of me that was also like, because I know what Effie could be like at times. I was married to her. I probably dismissed it as well as, you're looking to scapegoat, you're looking to lay blame in a situation. And I kept telling her, this is my fault, you can lay it at the feet of other people. This is on me. So she then was, needed to sue for the police report. I told her, she said, I might need to name you in the suit. I said, you do whatever. I said, if you want to press charges against me, press charges against me. I will, whatever responsibility I can take for this, whatever way I'm found criminally liable, I'm ready. You know what I mean? It's other than being Nico's father and having to be here for Nico, my life is over. Do you know what I mean? And in some ways, I also felt like maybe it's better that I'm not around. I felt like a piece of shit as a father, Mm-hmm. So I was like, look, you can raise him. Your family can raise him. Cousins can he's got all these loving people. Clearly, I don't measure up. I shouldn't be around. And so I really mostly stayed out of that, the civil suit or really anything to do with that for quite a while. Mm-hmm. And in the back of my mind was that conversation with Miller. But even then, I was just like, So then I reached out to Morgan and Doug, and I said, I'd like to talk to the farmer at least. And they said, well, that's not a good idea. He's hitting the bottle pretty hard. And I think it was a little terse with them. And at that point, the division was growing. And I was like, well, the fact is he still ran over Sia and he hasn't reached out to us. So it wasn't until the following year, I was just crawling through the day, basically just getting up and just trying to, and then, in the middle of all that, Effie and I were getting a divorce as well. So it was an extremely, extremely dark time. And I joined this group called Compassionate Friends, which helps parents that have lost their children and also people who have lost their siblings. And I remember I was talking to this other couple who had a similar thing where their daughter was run over by somebody, and they were at odds because the dad kept trying to get in contact with the driver. And the wife was like, why can't he just let it go? Why can't he just let it go? And then, and I remember saying to them, look, if I hit somebody or ran over somebody's child, whether it was my fault or not, you better believe I'd be on my hands and knees begging for their forgiveness and contacting them and saying, what can I do? How can I want to help you. And as I'm saying this, I'm like, the fuck am I talking about? Like, I have never heard from Roland Potter. And so that's what made me say, I need to take a trip up there and I need to meet this guy. If he's not going to contact me, then I'm going to contact him and I'm going to show up. And that's when I went up in the fall of 2018. And that's when I started to realize, oh, there's a whole lot more to this story. And there is definitely more blame to go around than just me. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what kicked it off.
Mm-hmm. This trip that you take to Nova Scotia in 2018-ish, is it at this time that you actually first meet him? Because I know you had at least one interaction with him.
Yes.
That didn't go well. Tell me about that. Like, just the idea of trying to meet this guy, given what you know and what has happened and the unanswered questions you have and the emotion you have, I can't imagine how that interaction and that meeting would have happened. Can you tell me about it?
Well, I knew enough to be somewhat cautious about it because I had been told by Morgan and Doug that he was not in a great way and that he was, and when they had talked about him before, this is when Sia was alive, they'd said, oh, they almost like talked about him in kind of cartoonish terms, like, oh, he gets a bit cranky sometimes and he has just disputes with people, but he's harmless. They sort of painted him as this like wacky old codger that lives down the end of the road. But so I didn't really know what I'd find. I knew that maybe he would not, he'd be reluctant to talk to me, but I was at least going to show up at his door and say, hey, look me in the eye. I'm here. No different than maybe a reporter would or something. It's very hard to like. So I didn't know where his house was. I thought that his house was Brandy Parker's house, because the field is right behind her house. Mm-hmm. Roland Potter actually lives across the street. And it's important to know that because that whole property dispute is because Brandy's yard abuts the field where Sia was killed. So that's what that whole property dispute is like, exactly where that property line is.
And just for people who may not get the names of the people, the property dispute that you're describing is Potter is now made news for somewhere between attacking and intimidating a neighbor with his tractor as a result of a property dispute. Is this the area you're talking about?
Yes. Yeah. He I've come to find out that it's my opinion that the only thing that this guy cares about is his land.
Yeah, his property. Because this feud that he's having with this other neighbor, that's very ugly. Like, I've seen the videos of him in the tractor digging up, looks like he's digging up their lawn. Everyone's screaming and shouting. The tractor engine is revving. The field that he's protecting or disputing, is that the field that Sia was killed in?
Yes, that's the field where Sia died as a result of her injuries in the hospital, but that's the field where she was hit. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the field. So I thought that Brandy's house was actually Potter's house. So I went, knocked on the door. No one was there. I waited. Eventually, Brandy rolled in. I thought that was his daughter. And so I said, I'm looking for your father. She's like, what are you talking about? So I start talking to her, and she immediately is like, what have you heard about this guy? Like, and I said, well, and I kind of told her, and she started to fill me in. She said, no, he's a bad man, and he's got a long history of violence in this community and antagonism. And she outlined some of the property dispute, and she started to tell me about a lot of things that had been happening in the community, some which had to do with him, some which had to do with law enforcement, but just,
And this is all news to you at this point?
This is all news to me.
Wow. Okay.
So And then she points out that he lives across the street. And so then I attempted to go across the street, and his nephew came out. There's a guy named Charlie, and Potter came out of the house with a baseball bat. So that was sort of my first time kind of setting eyes on him. So Charlie gets in my face, starts screaming at me, trying to intimidate me. And so there's a little pushing and shoving. And then he calms down, and he comes across the street and starts to show me the equipment and the mower that ran over Sia. And I taped all this. I have recordings of all this. And Potter never comes out. And then eventually Vivian, who's Potter's wife, shows up, and she explains to me what she remembers from that day. She tells me that she heard Sia scream from the house, which is another thing that's never really sort of followed up on by anybody, because if she said she had the TV on and she heard Sia scream from the house. So if she heard Sia scream from the house across the street, mm-hmm. How is it that Potter in that tractor didn't hear it at all, right? Mm-hmm. Doesn't make any sense. So in the course of that conversation, she says, let me talk to him. Come by the house the next day. I'll arrange for him to sit down with you, and I'll calm him down, and you can come by the house and talk to him. And I said, okay. So I called the next morning just to confirm. I got her voicemail. She never answered. I left a message. I said, I'm still coming by at noon. And then I show up at his house at noon. As I drive up the driveway, clearly they're expecting me, because there's like 3 guys that are standing there with their arms folded. So I'm thinking, oh, fuck, because one thing I had been told is that, he had a house full of guns. And he was nowhere to be seen. He was inside the house. So I there was a part of me that was like, you turn the car around and get out of here. Mm-hmm. But then there was another part of me, obviously, that, it was like, like you said, like I have no choice. This is what I do now, and I need to know, and I need to do this for Sia. So I set the recording on my phone, got out of the car, so I could have an audio recording just in case something went down. At least there's some evidence of it somewhere. And I asked for Potter, and the guy said, just a second. And next thing you know, he comes flying out of the house, screaming at the top of his lungs, and takes a swing at me. And so I just instinctively blocked the punch. I counter punch. I'm a lefty, so it's great, because it was actually a perfect vantage point to do that. He's swinging with his right. I step to the left, block it, hit with he's wide open. And then he fell back and went scrambling inside. And then I thought I was going to get jumped by the other 3. So I just sort of scooted back a little bit to kind of triangulate. Nobody does anything. Then I'm thinking he's going to come out of the house shooting, mm-hmm. which he doesn't. And then it just dawned on me, these people are fucking cowards. Mm-hmm. Like, they are fucking cowards. And as much as, I've talked to people in that community that are afraid of these guys, they are the classic bully, in which they intimidate through fear. But when push comes to shove, and when you press them, there's nothing. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, I stayed probably a good 3 or 4 minutes. Vivian let me know that the police had been called. And I thought, well, that probably won't go well. So I left. And then later I found out that they pressed charges. And not only did they press charges, but they put according to the police report, they left out the 4 other people that were there. And in their version, I just showed up at the house and started attacking Roland, which is, not what happened. But I did get thrown in jail a few months later, and then, eventually the case got dropped because they had the audio recording, and I was like, yeah, put him on the stand, and James will absolutely destroy him. So that was my first introduction and to him. And so then when I went back, I came back to Maine, I was absolutely convinced, okay, nothing I've been told about this guy up to that point is true. He's clearly, there's something fucking wrong with him. Mm-hmm. And he's clearly hiding something. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I really started to lean into it and say, maybe Effie's been right all along about this, and maybe I need to step back from my own guilt. It doesn't negate the guilt that I feel at all, but that doesn't mean that a crime wasn't committed. And if you're going to find me responsible, which you should, then you definitely need to find this guy responsible who knew that she was in harm's way, clearly. So that's when I started to get more bullish about the case.
Hello, listeners. Sorry to pull you out of the episode like this, but I want to take a moment and remind you of the benefits of a nighttime premium feed subscription. First of all, I release the episodes ad-free and 2 days early on the premium feed, which gives you the show quicker and a lot less painfully. Secondly, I maintain a full back catalog of nighttime episodes and countless hours of bonus content only on the premium feed, so to give you more of the show than any sane person would probably even want to listen to. And the third thing, premium feed subscribers who do so annually get a discounted rate and receive a free swag pack by mail. Who doesn't love mail? And lastly, but hopefully most importantly, the premium feed will fund the creation of the show. My mics, my laptop, the little lights on my desk, it's all paid for by the combined efforts of the premium feed subscribers. So if any of this sounds good to you, for about the price of a cup of coffee, you can go premium right now at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. I want to thank you for considering it. Now, let's get back to the episode. At this point, at the point that this all happens, the official or the first investigation had already been concluded that there was no criminal wrongdoing. When is it that that you turned to Tom Martin? And for people listening from Nova Scotia, they likely know his name because he's a well-respected former homicide detective who's retired, turned to private investigator. So he's well known in Nova Scotia. So to get him on board would definitely put a feather in the cap of getting to the truth from your side. When do you turn to him?
Well, Effie she'd been actively trying to get the complete police report, mm-hmm. which we didn't get until 2 months later, December of that year. And in the meantime, she had started to speak to a criminal lawyer, and I was on that call as well, which is James Giacomantonio. Mm-hmm. So James was actually the one who brought Tom in.
Okay.
And James was initially skeptical because if you look at this case, just sort of broad strokes, there's not a lot there, right? It's just like, well, accident, kind of crazy, kooky farmer. She shouldn't have been in the field. It's tragic, but what's the problem? These parents need to let it go, right? So he understandably was also, he's very polite and respectful, but wasn't convinced that there was a there, and said, I need time to review the report. I need time to go over it. I don't want to get caught in something that's just, again, where we're going around in circles, mm-hmm. looking for an answer that is never really going to come. Then he went through the report, started to see the red flags, also took into account my interactions, and then I don't remember the exact time that Tom Martin was brought in, but he turned it over to Martin, who started looking at it and said, yeah, this doesn't add up. and could see it through an investigative standpoint of just off the top of my head, here are 7 things that they didn't do, and completely missed.
So the way it would have worked is Tom Martin would have taken all the information that was available at that point, like the prior police reports and interview transcripts and whatnot. He would use that as the basis to form his own investigation. And I believe the end result is he provides you and your lawyer with his report of, what went wrong and what he thinks may have happened. Am I kind of getting sort of the overall kind of process of that correctly?
Well, the first thing he did, to my recollection, is he wrote a report on the police report itself.
Mm-hmm.
And then so that was the first step. Like, here are all the things, here are all the red flags, here are all the things that they missed. Mm-hmm. And then the second step was to do his own analysis, equivocal analysis of everything, all the evidence, interviews that should have been done, site tests that should have been done, model testing that should have been done, following up on the parts, machine, basically the
everything that should have been done initially.
A complete investigation, yes. And then he did that. So he prepared 2 or 3 reports. The first was on the police report itself, and then the second was the actual investigation that should have taken place.
Wow. And how long does, even roughly, how long is it from you getting in contact with Tom Martin through your lawyer to you getting these reports that really show you, what should have been done and what, had it been done correctly, what it would have revealed? Roughly how long did that all take?
It took the better part of a year. I'd say 6 or 7 months, maybe, I can't remember the exact date that he sent it to us, but then, we had to read through it. It's 1,100 pages. Took a while. Hard to read through, obviously. But once we did read through it, then I really had a clear picture of, this goes way beyond conjecture now or my own personal interaction. This is hard evidence, and pretty irrefutable evidence. Aside from the missteps and the drinking and the breathalyzing, the site tests, to me, the 2 site tests, one in terms of the shirt and the vantage point and all the ways, the painstaking site test that he put in terms of getting the same shirt, matching the daylight, the height of the hay, sitting in the tractor, the different positions, that, but also the model testing he did where he analyzed, her wounds and the holes on the ground and the way she was found and the way she was positioned, and essentially determined that she would have been standing up right up to the point that the mower ran her over. Those 2 things alone are, in my mind, game-changing. Not to mention the interview that you then have with Potter, where he admits that he saw her for far longer. But just knowing, being able to factually disprove that he couldn't see her is something that, I don't understand why the RCMP or Nova Scotia PPS doesn't completely reverse course.
Yeah. And when I first heard Sia's story, the way I understood it was he had alleged that she was maybe hiding or ducking down in what I assumed to be tall grass and not visible. But when I saw Martin's report, I was shocked at, that I wouldn't even consider that tall grass. It's like an overgrown lawn almost is what it looked like.
Yeah, it was not tall grass. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like seeing his report and picturing someone her size dressed the way she was. You'd literally need to have your eyes closed to not see someone in front of your tractor as that was happening. Other than when you get the report, you kind of listed off a few things there that were the ones that stood out to, or the factors that stood out to you to be to show that there was some wrongdoing. Can you think of anything else other than the transcript of the interview that you read And then the site report and modeling. Is there any other pieces in there that you want to highlight that really stand out as, this shows something happened?
Oh yeah, obviously the admission of drinking before and after, which Martin points out that is a common tactic that alcoholics use to disguise the fact that they've been drinking. The fact that he was flying around that field, that he, Tom Martin talks about, his own words in the report. I'm going to mow that piece in a jiffy. It'll take about 10 minutes, and then Martin basically extrapolates what that would mean a time period of, he was basically playing the finish by the time the hot dogs were ready. It's not a huge field, but it's not small enough to do in 10 minutes unless you are absolutely just pedal to the metal. To prove crim neg, it's a wanton or reckless disregard of others. So there are so many things that he did in that 10-minute span, each individually on their own, which were wanton and reckless. Drinking and operating the equipment, going at a top speed, knowing that she was in the field and not stopping, being able to clearly see her and still not stopping. And this is where it gets into, well, I'll just say, to answer your question, the other thing Tom Martin talks about is also the fact that he fled the scene. Something that the RCMP really doesn't, follow up on or really even kind of drill down on. Like he essentially found my daughter dismembered and bleeding with horrific injuries and said, "Go tell your husband," and then drove his tractor home, which, again, tractor would be a piece of evidence, right? And basically got the fuck out of there. And then tells the RCMP, "I killed this little girl." So there are so many things in that moment that the RCMP, that again, on their own, people get arrested for less. Rolling pot of these. I'm just outlining the big things.
Of course.
So Goulding. So when they train you to be a police officer, you have to, when you first show up at the scene, you are supposed to just take statements. You're not supposed to ask any leading questions. You're supposed to just take notes and then make your determination later on, right? Almost immediately, Goulding says in the police, and this is in the interview and in his own report, he says, "Well, it was an accident. There was nothing you could do." He makes his determination within minutes of showing up there. This is another huge, crucial error that more or less closes our case or walls us off from doing anything, because the undoing of that and trying to get a case reopened, as you probably know, is such a monumental task. So now, as far as where we get into the sticky area and Tom's determination that Sia was worried about the dog and she had lost, because there's a whole part of her coming back to the door. So there's the whole part which we kind of skipped over in terms of, while I was up in the room, of what was happening downstairs. And according to Morgan, Sia came back to the door and said, I'm fine," and then ran back out. And then suddenly Morgan was like, "Oh, wait a second. Potter's doing the field. Is everything okay?" Morgan goes outside of the house. And this is another thing I'll never understand. And again, as much responsibility as I feel, but as a parent, if I'd gone out and I'm suddenly aware of the tractor and the danger and the mower, and I don't see my granddaughter anywhere, you better believe I'm going to keep walking around until I get eyes on her. And she assumed that she was in the hammock, which was blocked by a shed. Had she actually, again, taken those few steps, verified whether she was in the hammock or not, looked around, called out her name, anything, she might have saved Sia's life. You never know. So there's this whole thing where Sia comes back to the door. Morgan goes out, goes, "Can't see her." "Oh, well, go back in, make dinner." What Tom thinks happened is that she was saying, I need to find, I find, meaning looking for the dog. That's what, because
Okay.
again, there was this whole notion, another, circling back to what we were saying earlier, another big amount of damage that Morgan did to this case was talking about how troubled Sia was that morning. And so painting this picture of this little girl who's troubled and her parents are going through this, potentially a divorce and marital problems. And then she's troubled at the barn. And so maybe she just kind of ran into the field because she's, just feeling reckless. And so she's going to go into this field with this loud, noisy motor. Well, look, she's very aware of a danger that would exist. And moreover, the troubled look that Morgan saw was in direct response to the fact that you painted this fucking utopian, petting zoo that never materialized. Mm-hmm. And basically she was told for the better part of an hour and a half, don't touch that, don't go there, stay away from there, don't, she's frustrated, as any little girl would be. It's like, I just want to run around and be with these animals and pet them. And so a lot was made out of that. So if you factor in all these things, why she was in that field, to me, it makes the most sense that she was worried about the dog. But the other part of it is, how did she still end up in harm's way? And this is the thing that, Tom Martin can only go so far to speculate about, because he has to stick to the evidence and what can be proven, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look at that report, I feel like there was no question that Tom and James made a very successful case over for criminal negligence, wanton or disregard of human life. He knew that she was in danger. He did not stop. There were a number of pieces that he leaned into that reckless behavior, and has since and before always exhibited that kind of behavior when it comes to farm equipment, driving, people, his animals, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But for me, knowing what's gone on with the Parkers and in that property dispute, I really do. It's like, I don't believe that he got up that morning to kill somebody. I do believe he was a ticking time bomb. I do believe if it wasn't her, it might have been someone else. Mm-hmm. But I think when he gets on that field, anybody steps foot on it or messes with his routine, he just sees red. And that's the X factor that is so hard to prove, even though it seems so obvious to me.
Especially if you watch the videos of him dealing with...
If you watch the videos and you study his case history, absolutely. Here's a guy who, part of that wanton or reckless disregard is because he cannot control himself. He does not have the capacity to control his anger. You're looking at a guy who has been locked up numerous times since because of making threats. Right now, he's under a peace bond not to go over on Brandy's property. You can get arrested if you violate that peace bond. But what does that tell you about his psychology? Mm-hmm. He cannot stop himself. Mm-hmm. He can't control his anger. Mm-hmm. So you're telling me that there is no possibility that he saw, and it's not like my daughter, again, I feel confident about saying this because I've heard her described in this way by members of his family, no different than an animal to him. Mm-hmm. So it was literally like, what the fuck is she doing on my land? I'm going to keep going. She better get out of my way. And if she doesn't, oh well. That's really what I thought was going on in his mind. And I don't believe for a second that he didn't know he had hit her. I think he knew. I think he kept going, went, oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck, came back to her body again and was like, I need to do something. I need to call attention to this, and then ran home. Those are the actions of a guilty man. Mm-hmm. You tell me how that's not a crime.
Mm-hmm. And you at this point, you have the report to prove it. And Tom Martin's report, I've read through it myself. It is
Irrefutable. Yeah.
irrefutable, backed up. He shows his math, and I think anything other than a complete reinvestigation of the case seems like it would be, the wrong course of action. What is it that you're hoping for at this point? Like you have the information to back you up, but for criminal negligence, what is it you're advocating for?
Well, I want the RCMP to accept responsibility for their mistakes. Jay Goulding, I've reached out to him numerous times. He will not talk to me. He has asked his HR department and local police to speak to me, to ask me to stop communicating with them. That doesn't strike me as a guy that feels proud of his work. You're a police officer. I mean, suck it up. Do you know what I mean? I get that it's not easy to talk to a father who has lost his daughter, but to go that way about it, like you have no backbone. Do you know what I mean? Like I have a lot of respect for the police. I have a lot of friends who are police officers. I've run it by a few of them. I don't know anybody who would behave that way. So the first thing would be to get RCMP to take ownership of the fact that they fucked the dog in this case, and to do what they can to reopen it. I'm not holding my breath, but if they did that, then it would give us a chance of getting this prosecuted in a court, getting this evidence out there, and putting Roland Potter behind bars, where he clearly belongs, for this and for so many other things. And, at this point, I imagine after this latest case, the backhoe incident, I'm sure he feels untouchable. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not going to stop until I'm just not going to stop. I'm not going to stop until he's behind bars, and I'm not going to stop until the truth is out there and recognized.
You talked a lot early on about the period just after Sia's death, with blaming yourself and being, down in this hole of blame and guilt and regret and all these things. Seeing this report and better understanding what Potter did and didn't do, does that change the way you feel inside at all? Like, does that help in any way with you understanding, your role in this and what had happened?
No, because I went back to the farm share where the owner of that farm, well, I give him credit for letting me kind of roam the property and go back to where Sia was, but then he proceeds to tell me about how he believes in reincarnation, and he tells me that he turned to Morgan that day and said, this little girl is going to die. He's telling me all this, that he had this sense that she was going to die and was courting death, which of course influenced Morgan, who that was then the phrase that she used with the police. Talking to Brandy, I had coffee with Brandy. She started telling me some other things about the community, just the kind of stuff that's gone on, the some abuse that's happened towards children in years past. It just, all of it was like I brought my little girl into a den of wolves. That's what I left with. It's I never should have brought her up to this horrible place. And on the surface, you have this picturesque town, this this pastoral community, and the Bear River and Clementsville and farmland, and organic coffee shops, and all the things that people, I'm sure, they get out of the city and they escape to, and they look around and they think, look at this this wonderful place, and so progressive, and all the things that we want to middle class parents with kids want to tell ourselves. But underneath, is just kind of this seedy side. There's a lot of drugs in that community. There's corruption. There's, and then, just people are people. It's like a system is only as good as, or a community is only as good as the system and administration that supports it. Mm-hmm. And people are flawed. And so, you don't have the best trained officers going out there to that detachment in Annapolis Royal. So I understand what you're asking. There are times when I have this realization that it wasn't solely my actions that led to her getting killed, but it doesn't comfort me, I mean, it's not going to bring her back. It was still my job to protect her. And in some ways I feel so much worse now because, like I said, had I done my research or put in a little time of figuring out, had I trusted my gut, which was, I never wanted to bring her up there. I did it out of pressure, and I should have trusted that. And I should have trusted Effie's gut. And in that sense, that's where our marital differences, I think, played a part, because it was like, I wanted to show her probably in some way, no, we can make this work, and let's find a peaceful, instead of always kind of shutting it down, like, Morgan and Doug they're trying to turn a corner. So let's give them a chance, instead of just saying, look, my family shouldn't be involved in our children's lives. Let's just stick with your family, who we know is exactly where she needs to be. And that was I don't know if Effie talked about it, but that was a pull that I constantly felt. And I should have just cut the cord years ago, instead of trusting, whatever picture was painted for me. So yeah, it doesn't make it any easier, but I'm grateful that I know more of the truth. It's the only thing that I can do.
I want to thank you for joining Erik and I in our conversation. After producing over 250 episodes of Nighttime, this conversation has to have been one of the hardest for me personally. Being a dad myself, hearing Erik describe the good times with Sia, I could so clearly relate. I can't imagine how his situation must feel, far from it. But I can appreciate his desire for justice for his daughter. As you can probably understand by this point in this series, the man operating the tractor, Mr. Potter, is quite the controversial character. His behavior, both during and after Sia's death, have been discussed during these episodes, but we've only scratched the surface so far. So let me call back to the beginning of the first episode in the series. Remember I described that video showing a man on a bit of a rampage in a tractor tearing up a lawn? Well, Nova Scotia court records, a series of YouTube and TikTok videos, and a current court-ordered peace bond hint at Potter being someone who maybe shouldn't be in control of powerful farming equipment. In the next episode, we're going to learn a whole lot more about the man who operated the tractor that took Sia's life. In that talk, which will be released shortly, Brandy will tell us about what may be the worst neighbor in Nova Scotia and the tractor he uses to intimidate her family.
So he was on his property by the road, and he was screaming at my sons. And he told my son that he was going to wait till we were all asleep, bring his backhoe over, knock our house down, and kill us all.
With that, I'm going to wrap this episode up. But before we part, let me give thanks. First, a big thanks to Erik for sharing a behind-the-scenes look at his family's tragedy with us. I can only hope that in him doing so will put more advocates in Sia's corner. Next, a shout out to LJ from Dystopian Simulation, who provides this series' intro and outro voiceovers, as well as Monty Datta, who provides the score. But lastly, and most importantly, I have a massive thank you to everyone who listens to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. And on the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers of the show's premium feed. Maria, Sandy, and Megan, thank you for going premium. For anyone else who'd like to support the show, you can access the premium feed at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast, or you can give the show a pat on the back by simply sharing this episode on social media and letting like-minded friends know what we're doing here. If anyone out there has any story ideas, wants to give feedback on the show, or would like to share your opinion on Sia's case, you can do all that and more at nighttimepodcast.com. So until next time, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.